1, 2, 3, 4, now she's ready, now it's time. A Boston girl who knows true crime. She got cash, attitude, gonna put you in a rock mood. She knows Sunday, she knows summer, now she's ready, now it's time. A Boston girl who knows true crime. She got cash, attitude, gonna put you in a rock mood. She knows Sunday, she knows summer, Penny after dark.
Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you are new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight is a special episode. I am doing another one of my book reviews where I dedicate the entire show to reviewing this book, as well as kind of giving a bit of an idea of what it's about, reading a little bit from it, as well as giving you guys my honest and very, very, dare I say, insightful opinions on it and recommendations on it. Obviously, I would not be doing a video on it if I did not recommend it. So I am so excited to do this episode. I have been obsessed with this book for the past couple of months, and I have read it over and over and over again and reread it again last week just to prep for this episode, to get all my notes in order. And I'm just so excited. I mean, you guys know, we love to read here. I love calling myself a book nerd. It is what it is. But when you read a certain book, and there are books where you read and you're like, yeah, that was good. And then there are books that you read where you're like, oh my God, that was amazing. I need to share this with everyone. That's what this book is for me. So I'm so excited. And there's a lot to talk about. I have a lot of notes. So before we dive into that, let me first tell you what book it is that we're here to talk about tonight. And that book is Fazeline Green, the FCI, the FCI Talladega Hostage Rescue. And that is by James A McGee. And I first heard about James McGee. Actually, he was in a guest on another true crime podcast that I've recommended to you guys before. And that is called the FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I was fortunate enough to meet Jerry at CrimeCon. So nice, so amazing, so kind. And I first heard her interview James, and that's how he kind of came on my radar. But that was quite a while before CrimeCon, right? You guys know I went to CrimeCon last year. Flash forward to I'm at CrimeCon, and I see on the schedule that James McGee is doing a presentation on Waco, David Koresh, and the Branch Davidians. So right away, I'm like, all right, I'm already familiar with his interview with Jerry. That was amazing. I want to see this. One, I was interested in the topic, but two, I was like, I've heard him speak before. He commands an audience. I was ready for it. And it was so good. So good. I honestly left that presentation and I texted my co-hosts over on the Paulcast. I texted Paul and I texted Mr. Beckham. And then, the Liz, I messaged her too. And I was like, I just went to this awesome presentation. It was so good. So good. So yeah, after that, I was like, all right, I need to get this book. I need to get this book. I have high expectations before I go into it. And I was lucky enough to be able to connect with James and to get this book. So again, Fazeline Green. And what is really cool, and again, this is just me completely nerding out, is he signed it for me. So I don't know if you guys can see that. So it says, Danny, thanks for your interest. Enjoy the read. Jim McGee, PhD. So that is very cool. Very, very cool. Stuff like that means a lot to me. So all right. So before I jump into talking about the book and giving you guys a background on FCI Talladega, I didn't know much about it, and about the HRT, which I didn't know a lot about. I'd heard about it, on the podcast that James was on over on FBI Retired Case File Review, But besides that, I didn't know much about it. And so to read this, it really gave you a better sense of that. And I'm going to kind of talk about that with you guys just so you kind of can follow along with what I'm describing. So before we do that, let's see who's here tonight. Russell Hamill first, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you always, Russell. Kane, Renee. Let's see. Oh my God. You guys, whoever gets the first most times will get an autographed copy of Beckon's book. Oh God, talk about a wasteful prize. Hey, Chris James, good to see you. Hello to the Better Paul. Greg, bye. Hello. I am always on time. I am always on time. It is over on the Paulcast where if we're delayed even by 1 minute, it's because of the guys, never because of me. I'm the type, no, I'm a on-time punctual person. So welcome. Good to see you. Let's see. I thought we were here to talk. No, no. What would Beckham's book even be? It would be like, hey, doll, get me a coffee. The Beckham biography or something like that. Like, oh, no one would get that. James Watson, good to see you in the chat. You have been missing lately and people have been inquiring. So I'm glad you're here. People can call off the search guard. Hey, Nick, good to see you. Tony Stewart, hello. Okay, I think I got everybody. So before we jump into that, just a little exciting news in regards to, I know you guys are wondering, the door's closed. The cats are not coming in here tonight. However, the cats just got a brand new cat tower, like a huge cat tower. And before I came in here and closed the door, there were 4 of them on it all at once, which is like even 2 of them that kind of bicker a little bit. So yeah, that cat tower will be moved into here. Right now, it's just in the hallway. So yeah, I think once that happens, especially for my true crime and chill later this week, that will definitely draw some of the cats into the room. So yes, the cats are doing good and very much loving their brand new cat tower. So yeah, and if you guys go back to my older videos or, kind of before I reshifted the room, there was that large cat tower in the back. Yeah, got rid of that. So got them a brand new one because, all you animal people know, we are here to spoil our babies and that's what we do. Those cats are my real buddies. I know that's what, Tony Stewart, I know that's the only reason you tune in and I ain't mad at it at all. I ain't mad at it. If you didn't see my True Crime and Chill this past week, Tony, forgive me, I can't remember if you were in the chat at the time. Liz, who was on here with us, her cat came into the room and she was able to hold her cat up. And then one of my cats came in and I was able to kind of hold them up on the screen. So if you missed that, go back. So let's see. Renee says, have you seen how people build those shelves all over the world? Yeah. Cat Superhighway. It's called a Cat Superhighway. Yes. Yep. Yeah, I am not to be trusted with a hammer and wall. Otherwise, I would have those everywhere. So life revolves around my cats. I know we are all pet people. We get it. So that's why I say that. Anybody else would be like, what the hell are you telling us? You got a brand new cat tower. But I feel like you guys would be like, yes, yes. I meant I was on time for once. Oh, got you. Okay. And even if you aren't on time, it's all good. Pop in anytime that works. I'm glad you're here. So thank you, Greg. All right, let's jump into this because I'm so freaking excited. I was watching the clock go down this evening. I'm like, oh my God, I want to talk about the book. Come on, another hour. Let's go. So, okay, again, Phase Line Green. So this book, and before I forget, the FBI retired case file review with Jared Williams, that episode, and a short clip from CrimeCon of James speaking about his experience. 1 second. All right. My Wi-Fi might be going in and out a little bit. So if it is, my apologies. Pausing. I know. Okay. Let me get another thing up just. Okay. Technology at its finest, folks. Just making sure this is good to go. Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. There we go. This never happens on the Paulcast. Oh, man. James, not even cool. Not even cool. All right. All right. I think it resolved itself. Just double checking. Okay. All right, cool. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. So just a quick description of James. So you really get the sense in the book from James of his personality and just kind of the type of agent he is and the type of leadership he expects being in the FBI HRT. And that was really cool because right up front, you get the vibe of no nonsense, no bullshit, just get the job done. None of the political bullshit that comes with ranks, for example. And this wasn't unique necessarily when he was describing it about the FBI, but also in regards to, okay, thank you. I know, Tony, it's your fault. Thank you. Yeah, so when he describes it about other, like people moving up the rankings in the FBI, it's not just unique there in regards to, the jobs that we have, that we see in every day, where it's not always about who is the best leader in leadership roles. Sometimes it's about kind of the politics and kind of getting your way up in the ranks that way. And right away, James is just like, I know what it takes to be a leader. This is what I expect. And it doesn't always happen. He's very just straightforward with it. So you get that vibe right off the bat. And I love that. He also, when this book is taking place, this FCI Talladega Hostage Rescue, he has a wife and he just had a newborn baby girl. So kind of keep that in mind as these men are being deployed. They have families and, lives of their own, and they're putting their lives on the risk when they have, ultimately a family and a newborn daughter at home. And it's just kind of, he mentions that a few times during the book that his wife and his newborn daughter. And I'm just like, oh my God. But all right. So what does phase line green mean? So phase line green refers to the final position before an assault commences. As he describes it, at phase line green, assault teams wait only for the signal to go before breaching a crisis site to save hostages. Before, let's see. Yes. So of course, my notes just jumped. In 1991, Cuban inmates of the Federal Correctional Institution in Talladega, Alabama, overpowered their guards and took 11 hostages. The inmates were facing deportation and were desperate not to go back to Cuba. The HRT was brought in so that in the event that negotiations failed, the hostages could be saved. 10 days into the standoff, the inmates threatened to start killing the hostages. In the early hours of the morning, the HRT waited outside the correctional facility at phase line green for the command execute. As the book describes, and as the kind of description inside the book describes, James McGee offers a rare insider's view of the requirements and specialized skills necessary to deploy to an incident like the Talladega hostage crisis. He exposes readers to the punishing training program and the mental and physical sacrifices that come with being a member of the FBI HRT. In a nutshell, that is beyond spot on to what this book is. I'll go a little bit more into describing kind of what that is. And I'm interested from you guys too. Have you guys heard of this? The Talladega hostage rescue negotiations. I had not heard about it much before, again, except for when I heard him on Jerry Williams' podcast. So let me know if that's something you guys have heard about. I didn't know much about it. one thing I will say also is James, and he does talk about this, kind of at different points in this book. He was at Waco. He was at Ruby Ridge. And I know those are ones where you guys are going to be like, oh, yes, I'm familiar with that. So we know that. You might not know this story, though. And this is just as important. So, okay. A few people jumping in the chat. Hello, good to see you. Welcome. Okay. So one thing I really liked about the book, and it goes into a lot of terms that kind of the average person and the average reader might not know. I'm just getting to the part in the book, there is several pages. So I'm just so excited to talk about this book. I just can't contain it, of acronyms. So page after page after page. So if you don't know the term that he's referring to, for example, HRT, Hostage Rescue Team, if he refers to, for example, NOTS, New Operators Training School. So there's a lot of terms that he uses throughout the book, and it's really cool to have this back here of acronyms. You can just quickly be like, wait a minute, I know that was mentioned last chapter, and I totally forgot what that meant. You can go back and easily be like, got it, okay, now I follow along. And that's pretty cool. So let's see. Okay, so you're saying, yes, you on the news during that time. Okay, so you're familiar with it. Awesome. And welcome. Thank you for joining. Russell says, I've been to the Branch Davidian. Have you, Russell? I didn't know that. I did not know that. Okay, Kane says, never heard of it. Perfect. Tony Stewart, I will not put your comment on camera. You are being fresh. Behave. Okay, so that's good to know. So cool. We can talk about it, and you'll be able to learn from this, as I was able to learn from this book. So a little bit of background on James, just so you again have a little bit of an idea of who he is as an author and as a person in regards to how it relates to this story. So James started working with the FBI in November of 1986. In March 1987, he started investigating criminal violations known as reactive. He then did 16 weeks of new agent training classes. He worked on a federal fugitive warrant for Gregory Dewey Clifford. For those of you who don't know that case, he was wanted for the mutilation homicide of his estranged wife. So I know that is a little bit more of the true crime type of things that I cover on here, but we're not getting terribly into that case. Just throwing that name out there. If you want to know more about that, look that up, because that is very fascinating and interesting in itself, right? So in December 1989, it was announced that there would be an upcoming selection that would be conducted for those FBI agents interested in joining the hostage rescue team known as HRT. So James describes how he started training. And you guys, I was blown away at how rigorous this is. I honestly had no idea. So as he describes, and this is just for example, right? 13-mile run, and had a 5,500 foot elevation at the base that increased to 12,000 feet at the top. He increased his push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups. He incorporated grinders into his runs. I have never heard of a grinder. I have no idea what it was. Thank God he described it. And as he did, I'm like, oh my God, like the training for this, the physical training for this is incredible. So he describes it as when you stop every 2 minutes during a 6-mile run, do a set each of push-ups and sit-ups. And each time you stop, the number of repetitions increases by 5. So that by the time you reach the last set, you're over 100 reps for each exercise. Wild, you guys, wild. So in March 1990, after 10 weeks of intense preparation, he departed for the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia to attend the HRT selection. The FBI's hostage rescue team was the final option in the event of any high-risk law enforcement action within the continental United States. As James says, he had one goal in mind, and failure was not an option. So going to go on for a little bit, and then I'll kind of pause and see where you guys are in the chat. So James goes into detail on the number of operators on the team and each one having their role in the line. And I thought that was really useful because, again, this was something I didn't know much about. And when I say he goes into detail, specific detail. If there's, for example, 5 people in the line, he says what each one of their roles is, and ultimately what each one of their roles kind of depends on the other person as well. So if one person can't do one thing, it ultimately can be detrimental to the rest of the line. So everybody has to be on point. And this is one of those jobs where you have to be on point. There's no middle room. There's no half-assing it. There's no room for error, basically. So, and with James, he was the number 1 man in the line of the march, called the running point. Again, he goes on to detail and describe how you would enter the crisis site through different breach points. And he describes, again, the roles of each operator as that happens. He stresses that each member of the assault force had to study the plans of the crisis site prior to going into the building. And that makes sense, right? The detail was so specific that they would even know the exact number of footsteps to take. And he outlines that the entire operation should take about a minute. And I had no clue that it was that detailed and that it didn't take that much time in regards to once they entered the breach point. We kind of see, for example, I'll just use Waco, for example, how many days they were there. We think of all this time, but then from the time of the breach point to the time when basically the entering is over, not much time passed because they have to be so specific and on point, and they have to get it done quickly. So to read that the entire operation should take about a minute, that was very interesting to me. And it was one of those things where I just sit and process that and be like, wow, these operators are that good at what they do that they can do that. And it's just honorable and commendable because it's just it's out of my expertise, out of something that I had, real knowledge about. So all operators must also process the ability to read the threat immediately upon entering a room, make a decision, and then act accordingly. Target identification is one of the first principles in regards to when engaging a potential threat. They do not shoot to wound because a wounded person is still dangerous and has the capability to kill. The threat must be neutralized. The well-being of the hostages depends upon this premise. In this next part, being the psychology person that I am, I was really on to what he was saying. So standard operating procedure requires cuffing in the hostages' hands behind their back with flex cuff. Yes, you heard that right. The hostages as well have to have their hands behind their back with flex cuffs. And one thing that he says, and it makes so much sense, is you can't assume that a hostage is friendly because Stockholm syndrome, right? We've heard about that in other cases that could have taken effect. And he mentions that throughout the book. That's a real thing. And when we get to, I don't get into it a ton in this review per se, but when he talks about Ruby Ridge, for example, that something like that plays a bit more of an impact than in this case. But yeah, we all have heard of Stockholm syndrome. It's a real thing. And if you have not been too familiarized with what cases that is involved in, definitely check that out, but check it out after you watch this. So, all right, quick pause to kind of see where you guys are with the chat, and then we'll continue on. Let's see. Hi, Sam Smith. Welcome. Good to see you. Let's see. You guys are kind of talking a little bit on your own in the chat. That is cool. Yeah, I know. Sam comes in and it's just, Sam, for once, could you just come in and say hello? Let's see. PRJ Grudge says, well, it helped the FBI, the Cubans had no guns. Correct. You're getting a little bit ahead of me. And I'm actually really happy that you know this, so you kind of know as I'm talking kind of what to expect and what this case entailed. So thank you. But yeah, you are just a little bit ahead of me. Renee says, let's see, I was married to a counterintelligence officer for 20 years. That's also messed up. Oh my God. Renee, every time I think I know you, I realize I only know the littlest fraction. Your life is the most fascinating one I've ever heard of. Oh my God, that's wild. Yeah, Russell, right? Oh man, the stories you must have. Oh my God, Renee. Man. All right. So just to, no, you're a good freak. If anything, you're a good freak of nature, but no. No, if you want a freak of nature, Mr. Beckham, and he's not even here, so we can all just go at him. So it's all good. Russell's jealous. All right, you guys, settle down. So I kind of broke this in regards to my notes where I was going to pause by chapters in the book. I think that was kind of the easiest way to do it. So next in the next chapter that I was referring to, he gives some statistics. And of course, I'm like, oh, love it. Because I love to kind of hear the numbers and the breakdown because it puts everything into perspective. So I won't take all of that and kind of, stretch that out because I know not everybody that thing, but just to give you guys am I pausing? Let me see. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay. Yeah, the Wi-Fi here is not the best. It's been like acting up lately, so my apologies that it's doing that. VHS quality. I know, I'm sorry. I'm like waiting for it to kick back up and in. All right, I'm just doing one quick thing here, hoping that will help it move along. Okay. All right. Let's move along. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. So in regards to some good statistics in this book that the FBI is messing with the Wi-Fi. Yeah, imagine. So for example, right, if the FBI receives 100 applications per year from candidates, that is 100 specifically requesting an invitation to the HRT selection. So much more than that is being, sorry, I didn't describe that right away, but y'all know what I mean. So let's say 100 are applying specifically to go to the HRT selection. After they select those to attend the annual selection, not many candidates survive the 2-week HRT selection course and then get chosen to continue the process. That doesn't mean you're in. From there, those who are selected must successfully complete the 16-week new operator training school. This training is so extensive, so incredibly extensive. And I did take some notes of what that entails. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. So, for example, firearms, mechanical and explosive breaching, physical fitness, land navigation, patrolling, defense tactics, dignitary, protection, emergency, tactical vehicle operation, maritime, assault tactics, basic trauma, life support, helicopter operations, fast roping, rappelling, and climbing. Those are just a few of the disciplines that are covered. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. Thank you. Yeah, I need to, figure out the internet, the Wi-Fi here. So my apologies, but thank you for sticking around with that. So again, that's insane. The amount of disciplines that an agent has to do just to even make it, So when all is said and done, out of that 100, there's only a few applicants that finish and then are assigned permanently into the HRT. Once someone becomes a member of the HRT, the routine training regimen consists of daily and weekly vigorous requirements. This was incredible. And as he describes it, at first you're kind of like blown away at how much they have to do, but then it makes so much sense. When he describes why, it makes so much sense. So shooting skills are fundamental to operational readiness, and basically your performance will suffer if you're not practicing. And that makes sense. So he states that an HRT operator shoots on average 1,000 rounds a week per training. He puts it in perspective to just a regular FBI agent. FBI agents are required to complete firearms trainings just once every 3 months or 4 times a year. So think about that. That's a huge difference. That is a huge difference. Successful assaults come only through countless hours of practice. That makes sense. And rehearsals. This includes mastering their weapons, the equipment, and the movement. He says, when the decision is made to assault, that means the crisis negotiations have failed. And that makes sense because obviously this would be the last resort. The rules of engagement are explicit. Anyone who threatens the life of the hostages is to be neutralized. And what's interesting, and I didn't know this when I read that, is all fired rounds have to be accounted for. The HRT does not factor in acceptable losses, nor does the HRT engage in suppressive fire. Every round fired will be scrutinized in court to determine the justification of their actions. That's so interesting. It's so interesting. And I had no idea. Maybe you guys do that. I had no idea. So James also explained he was approached by the HRT assault team supervisor and asked if he'd be interested in attending the U.S. Navy basic underwater demolition SEAL training. This was very cool. I loved reading about this part of the book. So, and it just goes to show the type of rigorous training that they do, how physically fit that they are. So he and 5 other HRT members did go to this training, and they described in detail the rigorous training that they had. So a funny story was, after one of the rigorous exercises and training that they did, the 6 HRT guys were asked to remain outside of the classroom while the instructor spoke to the rest of the class. They could hear the instructor screaming at the top of their lungs, basically saying, "Do you realize those HRT guys are old enough to be your fathers? What do you think the president is going to say when he hears they're kicking your ass in PT?" I thought that was so cool. So, all right, we're about to get to the day where the FCI Talladega, yeah, I said that right? Talladega hostage takes place. So before I jump into that, just quickly check with you guys on the chats. Oh, I know the Wi-Fi, you guys. I'm so sorry. I know I'm seeing your chat like, oh, this doesn't happen on Paul's. Sorry. Let's see. That's an expensive book. No, Russell. I will. No. I will get to that at the end. Let's see. The FBI just called me and asked me the quality of DNA. I'm kidding. Oh man, who are all those bullets for? Do you mean like the practice ones that they do? Let's see. Talladega. Did I? Yeah, I probably did. God knows I can't go through a whole episode without mispronouncing like 20 words. So, all right. I think I'm all caught up with you guys. All right. So now we are at the kind of meat of the book, if you will. So August 21st, 1991, for those who don't know what this story is about, I'm going to give you as much of a brief explanation as described by the author, but certainly research it more for yourselves, and certainly research it more by get your own book, because you will not regret it. Okay. So it was just an ordinary routine day for James and all his other operators. And what this meant, and listen to what their kind of ordinary day is, right? 8 a.m. it begins. Morning inside of the HRT classroom. The morning session then goes into the shooting house. The afternoon session is out on the firearms range. After, it was to the gym for some PT. This always included some form of run, an hour of lifting weights, different body parts on different days, abdominal exercises. Again, these men are physically fit, and physically fit is an understatement. So meanwhile, while this was happening at the Federal Correctional Institution, FCI Talladega, Alabama, a group of Cuban inmates had forcefully overpowered the guards within the Alpha unit, and they took 11 hostages. Some of the Cubans were already involved in the Atlanta and Oakdale riots. For those who don't know what that is, definitely look that up. From there, they were shipped to Talladega. They had the same demand. They didn't want to be shipped back to Cuba. They knew what would happen if they were shipped back to Cuba, and that was that they would most likely be killed as they exited the plane. When they were informed of the mission, as in the agents, there was already law enforcement at the scene at the security building, including FBI Birmingham, Bureau of Prison, who had one of their special operations response teams on hand. They were maintaining a perimeter along with local law enforcement. So James describes in detail, what type of equipment the HRT operators brings for their mission. So if that's the type of thing you're kind of into reading, is law enforcement, and especially here HRT operators, machinery and weaponry, great detail on that. Great detail. I can't even begin to re-describe it because it's so beyond out of my expertise that I'm like, I would be reading it to you guys and you'd be like, you have no idea what type of weapon that is, right? So that's where that is on regards to the equipment. And if that's something you're interested in, you would really, really dig that section of the book. So when the HRT arrives at the jail, it's almost midnight by that point. They secured the vehicles, hit the ground running. They met with the assault supervisor as a group, and they were updated on what was going on. At one point already, one hostage, a guard, had already been released about an hour after the uprising began. So now there were 10 hostages that were still being held. The guard that was released was able to provide information to the HRT members as to what the conditions were like on the inside, as well as the hostage takers, the level of commitment, and what weapons they may have had on hand. I know one of you guys, let me go back to, I can't scroll. Yeah, here it is right here. And that's the thing too. They had no guns. They had makeshift weapons, but they did not have guns. So yes, that was information that the guard was able to provide, which was helpful. Hello, Cameron. Welcome. Hugs for Tiffany. Thank you. With my Wi-Fi tonight, yeah, I really need that comment. So the HRT operators were split into teams. And I thought that was interesting because I didn't know I had no idea kind of what it was set up like. What if all the men were up 24 hours? I had no idea. Everything is so detailed. They know what they're doing. And of course, reading it, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. So they were split into two teams, and they were always already round the clock preparing. Again, always preparing. There was not a minute wasted. And he goes into great detail in explaining what that is. So I will give you the brief description of what that was. But again, it goes into way more detail. So again, you're split into two teams. So on your own team, you wake up, you're briefed on what occurred during the previous shift. You go to the chow hall for breakfast. You pull your emergency assault shift. You eat lunch, work out, eat dinner, work out, go to sleep. For the workouts, they had access to the jailhouse weight room. So when I say work out, he describes the type of workout that they do. It's basically what their training workout is. It's rigorous, it's intense. They're not just kind of milling around. They are on point 24/7. And that's something I didn't know. And I thought that was interesting. Even while they're there on scene, they're still taking advantage of that. So I'm going to have an eye on the chat as well. Old chow hall, those were the days. Oh man. So an agreement was made between the inmates and the negotiators. And this was interesting to follow along as James described it, because each time medical personnel made what was called a sick call to visit the inmates, they were able to inquire about and see firsthand the conditions of the hostages. And that makes sense, right? It was suspected that the hostages were surviving with little or no food. The inmates were also monitored for malnutrition. And again, the psychology person in me, right when he hits this part in the book, I'm like, all right, I'm right there with you, James. They were also looking to try to assess for the hostages if they had succumbed to Stockholm syndrome. And I'm so glad that he mentions that throughout this book, because it's such a real thing. And, you know, this is typically a different type of, I don't even know if the right word is to call it true crime book, if you will, than what I typically read. but fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then you guys know psychology is my thing. So to then get to that, like those parts in the book, it just really captures me when he gets to that. I'm like, all right. Because I want to know what they're looking for. I kind of am, I'm familiar with it from a psychology perspective, but as an agent, like what are those little nuances or signs that they see that they're like, okay, this is occurring. So I found that absolutely fascinating. Renee Chow Hall wasn't great, but there were a lot to eat. Oh yeah, he goes into detail about what each of the meals were while they're there. They were well taken care of. In regards to they were not going hungry. They had the same breakfast, same dinner, as opposed to the hostages and the inmates that didn't were very much going without. But we'll get to that. So one thing that I thought was really, really important too, and he goes into detail on this is, and I know I keep saying he goes into detail, as much as this will be a kind of bit of a longer Danny After Dark episode, I'm just giving you guys the briefest in a nutshell. He goes thoroughly into everything he's describing. So there's no stone unturned here in this book. You leave getting a sense of everything. You don't feel like I'm being told this story of what happened, but I can only understand it from this part because the author's mentioning all these other things on the outside, but not giving much detail, so I don't really follow along. No, that's not what's happening here. He gives you everything in detailed explanations on everything. So you see it, and when you read it, it's crystal clear. This book sounds fascinating. Gonna have to get it. Yes. Oh my God, you have to, and I will go over at the end how to do that. Okay. He discusses the media and how the public exposure can have very negative impacts on negotiations, and it can compromise the safety of the hostages. We are in a society right now. Think about it. This was in the 90s. Think of where we are now in 2024. Media is so different. There has to be a story, has to be a story on top of it. And people put things out there, and it doesn't always mean it's accurate. And that's really unfortunate because there are consequences. There are consequences today. There were consequences back then. And it's really interesting from his perspective to see how dangerous and irresponsible that can be when that happens. So we are in a society. Yeah, it's just interesting because there are lives at stake, and sometimes the media just doesn't give a shit. And it's really, really sad. And think again, so I was trying to think about it with not having 2024 goggles on and thinking back to the 90s early 90s when this happened. And it was just, wow, like they were just at the beginning of the media, kind of getting the news out there, if you will, compared to now. And it just, nothing's changed. And I could go off on that, but I digress. So in regards to the preparation, and again, I had no idea of what type of prep work that an HRT agent does. So when they were there, they had reproduced the floor plan for the crisis site. And then each of the teams would line up methodically, and they would go through the room clearing movements. So rehearsals are a vital component of preparing for an assault. As he was describing, the HRT maps out every level of a structure, every single details there. Stairs, closets, hallways, etc. It also included identifying alternative breach points if necessary. So on day 7 of the hostage takeover, approximately 30 inmates appeared on the roof. And for those of you who are already familiar with this and said you saw it on TV, you're already going to know where I'm going with this. So 30 inmates appeared on the roof, and they hung a banner from a bedsheet that said, quote, "Please, media, justice, freedom, or death," end quote. They held up another banner that read, quote, "We have not been fed for a week. Hostages are dying due to shortage of food," end quote. Several other sheets were draped over the sides saying, quote, "We have been abused for long enough. We want the world to know. We love you. Please pray," end quote. In response, the officers threw non-lethal smoke grenades on the roof. The smoke did help, and the inmates dispersed and climbed back down through the ceiling. HRT, Hostage Rescue Team. If I'm saying it so quickly that it's not being pronounced fully, my apologies. So yes, HRT. And I will put that in the chat just so that's clear too. Thank you. Okay. So he talks about at other times, the inmates were able to gain access to the roof again. And again, for those of you who followed this or saw it when it happened, in real time back in the news back then, you already know where this is going as well. So they had another banner that said, "We are not hungry for food, but for freedom." And then they also listed, and this was interesting because I didn't know this. I was just a kid when this happened. So they listed 3 people that the inmates wanted to talk to. And I was not familiar with who these 3 people were. So I, Googled them and kind of tried to get an understanding of who they were. So I realized the importance of why they were being requested. One was Cynthia Corso, a reporter for El Nuevo Herald, Brian Cabell, a CNN correspondent, and Weber Matos Sr., a Miami-based leader in Cuban-American affairs. Through negotiations, the inmates had tentatively agreed to release a hostage if they could meet face-to-face with Cynthia Corso. And as this book kind of describes that, you see that this can be similar to other hostage situations where, the people who are trying to say, we want this, they don't always follow through on their word. It's very common that they don't follow through on their word. And that happens multiple times in here. And it's just, as the reader, I'm like, oh my God, I can't even imagine the frustration. But then again, these are agents that are trained and they know how this works and they're prepared and they know things like this happen. But for kind of the average citizen here, if you will, wasn't really prepared for that. So Cynthia arrives, she comes and was escorted to the front of the Alpha building. There were several attempts to reach the inmates. They didn't respond. It's like, again, you requested her there. Now you're not responding. So I'm like, what the hell? When they did finally respond, they then refused to release the hostage in exchange for meeting with Cynthia. So, and as James described, and this was just what I was saying before, the inmates' indecisiveness was blatant and even expected. So he cuts that right off at the pass and says, we expected this. Their failure to follow through with the release of one hostage also seemed indicative of a power struggle inside the Alpha unit among the inmates. The book goes more into the power struggle that was happening inside, and that in itself was very fascinating to read about too. So the inmates, again, wanted Cynthia to be brought forward. And this time they did release a hostage. So within 20 minutes of the release, the inmates were granted an interview with Cynthia and her photographer. And me not kind of knowing how that then works, I'm like thinking, wait, so now is she at risk and her photographer at risk? But it was very well and strategically planned, which I should have expected. So the interview was conducted in a room inside the Alpha unit. They had a bar separating the reporter and the cameraman from the inmates. And HRT operators were there providing security for the meeting. So details from the meeting were passed on to the rest of the HRT during one of their pre-shift briefs. So that was interesting. Hostage negotiations team. Gotcha. Okay. So the HRT was prepared to move to the Bravo unit, which is the place that they were rehearsing for another assault rehearsal. Again, as he says, repetition is critical. It ensures that they conduct tactical movement inside the Alpha unit dynamically and that they reach the hostages as quickly as possible. It was interesting again, and I know I talked about it a little earlier and he talks about it early in the book, but it just goes to show, repeating it in here, it just really puts it all into perspective. Again, during each of their rehearsals, because now they are practicing what movements are going to have to be done if they have to make a breach. They're practicing that inside the Bravo unit. So he states how, again, had to memorize the exact number of paces it took for him to run his route. He knew the exact number of steps it took before turning into an adjoining room after the initial entry. He knew how many steps it took to reach the back wall of a room. Every operator on the assault team must also understand their position in the line of march. We talked about that earlier, right? And now that they're at a scene where if negotiations don't work, they're going to have to breach and they're going to have to enter. Seeing, and again, when I say seeing, it's because he does such a good job of describing it, them practicing and rehearsing. You see now them practicing in the Bravo unit. You get a feel for, okay, this is exactly what they're going to have to do step by step if they have to brief and break into the Alpha unit. Let's see. Tony says FBI must be moved on Danny's Wi-Fi. I think don't jinx it. They learned what not to do from the Iran hostage crisis. I'm not too familiar with that. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know this, meaning I don't know the specifics. So I don't have anything to compare it to. Let's see. All right, moving along here. We're getting there. So again, I hope you guys are enjoying this because I am really enjoying talking about this book with you guys. I've just been obsessed with it, like I said, the past few months. So I've been looking forward to talking about it with you guys and just kind of nerding out and talking about it. So anyway, way before you were born with Jimmy Carter. Okay, thank you. So that's basically back in Mr. Beckham's time. Got it. That is what turned the American public from predator. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know I've said this before on previous episodes, like going through, elementary school, middle school, high school, those like math classes, history, science, not my thing. It never was my thing. The psychology classes, aced. And then obviously I went to school for that. But yeah, and I look back and it's funny because when I got to college, like I loved it. And I went from being that person in high school that was like, I'll just skip class, to going to college to being like, I love school. And I was, early for every class, sat right in the front row. Like it was night and day. So I look back and I'm like, oh, there's all these classes that I should have paid way more attention to in high school, even though they had nothing to do with what I eventually went to get my degree in. Yeah, I do regret that. So yeah, it wasn't my thing through school, but yeah, not in high school. Oh no, in high school I got spoken to. They're like, enough skipping class. Like you're gonna fail. And then flash forward to college where it's like, I love this. And then like graduate with honors and all that. Oh my, night and day. But anywho, oh God, that could be a whole episode in itself. Point being, even if you're not into history, science, math, and you're not going to major in it, just pay attention. Yeah, because I didn't, and I missed out, honestly. So, all right, back to the book, folks. So, okay. And again, so in any situation, as James describes, where a special agent chooses to use deadly force, their decision, and he mentioned this, will be ultimately examined and scrutinized. So they must be able to precisely describe the situation that required such an action, and they must articulate their recollection with flawless accuracy. So unlike the military, and I didn't know this. I did not know this when I read it. So in the military, where the terms like, quote, acceptable losses, collateral damage, and suppressive fire, end quote, are included in the operations order, the HRT operator, again, must account for every shot round. So every round fired, and the margin of error is zero. It just like, when I read that, I was like, the pressure of what they do on top of that, it blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. I had no clue. So we're getting there. So on day 9, right, the negotiators were able to convince the inmates to have a face-to-face meeting. The Cubans agreed to what they call a sick call later that evening for medical supplies and food to be delivered to them. This time they had collected each hostage's jail identification card and placed into a pillowcase. If for any reason the inmates determined that a hostage needed to die, they were going to pick an ID card from the pillowcase, and that's how they were going to kind of at random determine who was going to be their next victim. And when I say victim, they would either throw the hostage from the roof of the facility or stab the hostage to death. So now, immediately following that meeting, everything changed. Everything changed. So the medical supplies and food were brought to them. And as the hostages were brought forward for a visual examination to determine their physical condition and well-being, one of the female hostages, she waved and she made a motion with her hand that alarmed the medical personnel. So what to them, as in the agents, it seemed that she was waving goodbye. It also seemed like she was trying to send a message indicating that the hostages were in danger of physical harm. So immediately, James describes that the HRT team members were all called into a meeting, and at this point, they felt the lives of the hostages who remained inside the building were in serious danger. So now a deliberate assault or a breach to get in was going to be required to save the lives of the hostages. So just checking out where you guys know. Okay. So we get to chapter 8 of the book, which is the following morning. So this is when everything happens. But I need a quick sip because I've been talking for 56 minutes straight, which without Beckham here, yeah, it's a lot harder. Usually I can be like, Beckham, what do you think? Beckham, what do you think? Okay. So what they decided to do now that they ruled that the hostages were in fact in danger, grab a beer. No, it is not a beer. It is not a beer, I assure you. But I am sporting my Boston Bruins pride, so yeah. But you guys, by all means, feel free to, however you do your Monday nights, you do you. Did he discuss the training on what to do if they became hostages? That's the scary part. That in particular was not discussed. That part, no. Sorry to disappoint. No, he goes more in depth in regards to if there was a deviation from the plan in certain ways, but not if they themselves became the hostage. But based on how he describes the line of march, you got as a reader the impression that there was always a backup person to a backup person to a backup person, that it seemed very unlikely that would occur. And I don't know, like this type of thing is not my expertise in regards to, again, I hate to call it like a true crime book because I know that's not necessarily what this is intended for. But so this type of reading is out of my expertise in regards to other hostage situations and crises. So if that has happened in other cases, there might be other books that describe what happens if that does occur. That particular thing, Renee, is not discussed in here. The plan for the assault for them to enter was to occur the following morning at 3:30 in the morning. And as a reader, I was thinking, again, this is this kind of level of reading this type of subject is not my expertise. I was thinking, wait, why wouldn't they just go in right away? But again, everything's strategic. They know what they're doing. So of course I'm like, come on, Danny, calm down. They'll explain it. So it was anticipated that the inmates would finally, now that they've gotten some food, they've requested food, they've gone with bare minimum here, that they would have eaten well and they would fall asleep. Early morning has historically been the best time to initiate an assault. During the sleep cycle, these are the hours when most people are in a deep sleep in their most vulnerable state. So the HRT would be entering through 3 breach points if everything went as planned, as I mentioned, right? So at some point during the assault, the teams would eventually link up. So James, again, went into great detail here now that the assault is going to happen. He went into great detail and specifics about each person's role in this, where they were in the line of march, as well as their assault gear. And he went over specifically the assault gear that he had with him and that he had on his persons. And it was a lot. It was a lot. I was blown away at how much one could carry on themselves and then, stick in different places within clothing and on their body and so on. And one of the things that they had to factor in was how much weight this was being added to their body. In some cases, this was an additional 55 pounds or more of weight based on these weapons and, all these other things they had to carry. So that all had to be taken into consideration because that makes sense, right? You could maybe run or do this at this speed, but now you're tacking on an extra 55, 60, 65, 70, 75 pounds worth of gear. You're going to move differently. But this is something that they've trained, so they're already aware of being able to act with that added weight. But I didn't realize it added up to or could add up to that much. So again, he goes into all of the detail of the operators getting into place. Each assault team, they would go through the procedure of notifying the Alpha 1 that they were at green, phase line green, with the last point prior to executing the assault. So at 3:43 a.m., James was the first in the line of march, the point man. So there were 2 inmates who actually saw the teams getting ready and fled from the window, most likely to warn the other inmates of the assault that was about to take place. This meant that the hostages would be now in extreme danger. So James detailed everything that happened from the blast that got them entry into the building as to what happened along the way to get the hostages. I could give you more information on that, but read it for yourself. It's so good, so detailed, and so I was on pins and needles reading it because I'm like, oh my God. In what seems like so long as he's describing it, again, these situations are a minute, maybe 2. Think of all this lead up. So it's just interesting how he's describing this, this attack, and it's, page upon page upon page. And then it's like, it was only like a minute's time. So it's very fascinating when you're reading it. So as James would say, quote, I relied upon the team rehearsals, my knowledge of the facility, floor plan, and my training to navigate forward, end quote. He also described some of the things that were unsuccessful with 2 of the other assault teams. In regards to their explosive charges to enter the building, they did not go off as planned. So again, as kind of Renee's question earlier, what if something goes wrong? And in here, there were a few things that did. In the end, those other operators were able to make it into the building, but it could have gone very differently. So the HRT operators, they got to the 9 hostages and they were safe and secure inside. So at this point, it must end, right? No. Now the evacuation process would begin immediately. One by one, the hostages would be directed to move through the corridor of operators, leading them to the Alpha 6 breach point. From there, they would be escorted to a holding area where medical staff would conduct a primary medical survey for injuries. He goes on to describe as well, rounding up the inmates and what that entailed. And it was just so fascinating, kind of how they cleared each room, and basically and he would describe some of the areas where the blast would occur when they were breaching to get in. And he was just like, yeah, if those inmates were still in the room at that time, gone. They would have been gone, just the way the blast had taken out everything in that room. Let's see. Wonder what's classified info he couldn't share. Right? I know, because that is an excellent point, because this is so detailed and you get so much that there is stuff that isn't being said, which makes sense. We don't have to know everything. We don't need to know everything. But that's a good point. Now I'm like, what little details were left out that I want to know? I didn't even think of that. Dang, I'm trying to pay attention. Must be getting soft when I hold it. No, this is just a longer review, because honestly, I cut down so many pages of notes I had. I think everything I read, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So, all right. So we got to the hostages, we and they. And now, one thing that was cool that, think about it. What did I not say happened? No shots were fired. And this is a testimony to the expertise and professionalism of the FBI HRT. No shots were fired. They were able to go in, take control, and do everything. And there were, again, no hostages were killed. No law enforcement officials were killed. No inmates were killed. There wasn't serious injuries that were sustained during the rescue. Inmate resistance, once they did get in, it was minimal. The explosive charges following the selective deployment of flashbacks, what happens was those stunned the inmates into being submissive. They overpowered and outgunned the inmates before they could even react. Again, when they get in there, it is quick and it's over very quickly. They know what they're doing. So after all was said and done, the HRT were busy ensuring that their gear was squared away in the event of another crisis occurring somewhere else, and they did have to deploy right away. So I was just like, wait, what? You do all this and then it's, all right, get to your gear. We got to go. The next crisis could call. We got to go. And he says, quote, the mission at hand always comes to an end, but the job is never over, end quote. And I was like, oh my God, like that statement is so powerful and it's so spot on. And then he also describes, this was, basically kind of 10, 11 days, right? But I say 11, when they were informed by the time they got there, and then, 10 days of the hostages being in there. But he describes it as 10, 11 days versus what it felt like. And it just seems like, I forget his exact wording, but not necessarily like a lifetime, but that it was so much longer. And he says that as this occurs when this was not a unique situation where that happened. Think of all these other, Waco, Ruby Ridge, the world is kind of spinning on, and 10 days doesn't seem like a lot of time, but for them, it's so different. Time moves so different. And that was very interesting because I'm like, I didn't think about it like that. And it makes so much sense. So much sense. Let's see. Really enjoyed your interview with Nicholas. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. Renee says he was definitely top secret, special caveat. Oh, I'm sure there's way more. There could probably be like a part 2 of stuff that we don't know, but if that's the case, put out another book. It's so good. I want to know. Wow, that's an intense job. Job is never right. Hi, Steph. Good to see you. Welcome. Beckham. Tomorrow is the case review. Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Beckham, for, I'm doing an episode here on something, but thank you for coming and talking about Scott Peterson. I really appreciate that. Renee, he does. So James does talk about in the book meeting like later on with a doctor or therapist in regards to them suggesting like PTSD. And think about it. This is something that, military personnel, law enforcement agents, first responders, it makes so much sense. The amount they're being put in a situation where they're seeing trauma like day after day after day after day. And I don't think it's realized in the moment of how much trauma is hitting them until later on. And so he does talk about that in there. There is a part in there about that, which I'm so glad that he put that in there because it's something that's not always talked about. I think in 2024, it's much, much better. It could be much better than it is now. I still think it's something that's still a little hush-hush, which is unfortunate, but it's talked about now. But back then, no, and I don't get, maybe just because I went to school for psychology, that's my thing, that's the field I'm in. And I'm like, that therapists are great. That is just, to me, such a huge part and an essential part of life is to get that, whatever reason it's needed, just get it. And I think it's a great thing, but not every profession sees it. And not every person who has gone through this even realizes they have PTSD. They could just be having all these, I hate to say symptoms, but thoughts, feelings that they don't know how to put into words, or they don't realize what it actually is, which is PTSD from what they went through. And I'm really glad he mentions that in here, because I don't always see that in a lot of true crime books or books where people have gone through such traumatic experiences, whether it's I've read other former FBI agents, and it's not always brought up at all, like at all. So the fact that he put that in there, I was I was surprised, but very pleasantly surprised, very thankful that he did. Let's see. Imagine what an inmate feels 24/7. It's tough to move to right. So here he comes home and he has his wife and baby daughter, and life just stood still for them, if you will. But here he was. It's an interesting contrast. What happened to the hostage takers? They were ultimately gathered and flown back. And from there, what happens? I believe he says he doesn't know what happened to them, but I mean, we all kind of figured out what happened to them. And he kind of alludes to that basically them going back to Cuba, they were going to be shot and killed pretty much as they got off the plane. But one thing that he says is, you do your job, you pack up your gear, and you move on to the next. You don't go back to research what happened in this case or what happened to that. No, you don't do that. You just this is your job. You go on to the next, and then on to the next, and on to the next. And it makes sense, but I was like, wow, it's so you're so disassociated from it, but you have to be. You really, really have to be. And throughout the book, he discusses they don't learn about the inmates per se, like the hostage takers. You don't want to get all that extra information. You just need to, who's the target, what's going on, and go from there. Like all that extra background, it's not necessary. It's not necessary. And that was interesting too, because I thought they would be, wanting to learn as much as they can. And with that being said, there are other law enforcement, like as they said, there were other agencies already there, and I'm sure that's what they were tasked with doing, is finding out more, which makes sense. But in regards to James and the HRT, you didn't do that. So that was interesting. Danny, can you show the book again? Absolutely. Absolutely. Baseline green. They actually deported Sam. You go back and debrief and train some. Yep. Toast. They did celebrate. They did, decompress. And then again, I think it was like 6 or 7 a.m. the next day on the plane back to it. Like there was just no rest. But yeah. So, all right, just a little bit more. So one thing that was interesting, and the top of the book kind of gives away a little bit of what I'm about to discuss. So the top of the book, I know it's kind of hard to see in this light, where it says, by one of the most decorated agents in FBI history, former Special Agent James McGee. So prior to the FCI Talladega Hostage Rescue, the HRT was a little known resource that existed behind the scenes, right? In recognition of the HRT efforts at FCI Talladega, the FBI awarded the HRT as a group the Medal for Meritorious, and I probably am mispronouncing that word, meritorious, oh God, sorry, achievement. And each operator was presented with the U.S. Department of Justice Certificate of Merit. So after that, James goes on to describe several other deployments that the HRT was involved in for the years following FCI Talladega. So when James approached 6 years on the team, and he points out that was twice the required commitment, which is incredible, because I mentioned way earlier in the episode, all of the rigorous training that you have to do to even become a member of the HRT, but then that you continually have to do daily. to keep up your speed and keep up, that you're able to shoot 1,000 rounds a week. There's just all that very rigorous and demanding tasks that are involved in training to be able to do your job. So if you're called out for deployment, you're ready to go. So after he approached 6 years on the team, in 1996, he left the HRT and was promoted to FBI headquarters as a supervisory special agent. He was then assigned to the domestic terrorism, counterterrorism planning section. He was tasked with responsibilities that will become critical in terms of national security over the next few years. He was in charge of the development and management of all joint terrorism task forces nationwide. In November 1998, James was transferred to the New Orleans Field Division and tasked with developing and supervising a brand new national infrastructure protection computer intrusion program squad. What is that? So computer crime investigations at that time were on the rise, and the squad was one of the first of its kind. So that's really cool. When I read that, I was like, oh my God, like, again, 2024, like, it was just thinking back, like, oh my God, that's right. That was so new and so necessary. And he was a part of that, which was awesome. Really awesome to read. Did I? Oh my God, I never say things right. Thank you. Oh man. A lot of names for those teams, right? That's why there is a section in the book that gives a breakdown of the acronyms. So once this, 1 year into this division, after he formed the squad, it was staffed, equipped, and trained. James went back into counterterrorism business. See, I got too cocky now that I said the one hard word right. Now I'm messing up the easy words. On September 29, 2007, James retired from the FBI with nearly 21 years of service. Incredible. He does. I was like, oh, should I talk about this? Should I not? And then I'm like, I don't want to, because I want you guys to get the book. I want you to get the book and read it for yourself. James was at Waco. He was at Ruby Ridge. There are smaller sections in this book where he describes being there. And it was just, I don't even have the words for it, just incredible, and just I just felt it was such a somber mood to read what he was experiencing at those incidents, because we've all read and seen, watched documentaries about Waco and Ruby Ridge, but to read it from somebody who was there, from the angle of what he was deployed there to do, was just, I don't know. I just feel like you can't get that perspective elsewhere. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just hard to describe, but I'm just really glad he put those parts in this book. I would love if he wrote, I'm obsessed. Okay, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with this author in a good way. I'm obsessed with this book. I'm like, this ended and I was like, no, I want more. Like, I want more. I wish that he had a book on his experiences of what happened at Waco. I wish he had a book about his experience of what happened at Ruby Ridge and just everything else in his career, because each thing he does just sounds so fascinating in itself. I just would have wanted more. Again, I am putting the links, it's already in there in the description bar, of his interview on the FBI former retired profile podcast with Jerry Williams, where he did an interview about this book where I first heard about him. And then there's I think it's like a 6-minute clip from CrimeCon where he talks about being at Waco. And I was there for that. It was, I think it was like a 45, 50-minute speech. I know everything at CrimeCon had to be like to a certain, down to the minute, because it was on to the next and on to the next, but it was excellent. So I'm hoping you guys see the clips that I put below and kind of get a sense of who he is, the type of personality he is, because I felt that came across incredibly on that podcast with Jerry Williams he did. It certainly came through at CrimeCon, and it came through in his book. And I really liked that because you really sense the type of person he is, structure. And it's funny, there's little things he puts in the book where he's like, I've never had to set an alarm in my life. I don't drink coffee. If I have to be up at 2 a.m., my body knows when to wake up for that. And I'm just like somebody who's just like, oh God, I could sleep all day if I wanted to, if I really could. And coffee's my best friend. It's just wow. Like little things like that, where you just get a feel of, how rigorous and just how structured his life is because of the work that he does. And it really comes through. And one thing that I also want to say about the author in this book is I had huge expectations for this book. And I know I shouldn't have gone into it like that, because I really try to just go in, all right, let's see how it goes. But I'd already heard his podcast interview with Jerry Williams, and I loved that. I saw him speak at CrimeCon and was like, the way he captures the room, and he's no nonsense, and he's just, let me just A, B, C, just lay it out. Boom, 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 here we go. There's just no bullshit, no nonsense, just laying out the facts. And I was like, I think I know what to expect in this book, and I have high expectations from it. And not only were those expectations met, it was far exceeded. And I, again, very, very into this book. It's different than the type of true crime books that I read. This is very different, very different. But I love it. I want you guys to get it. I think you would really enjoy it. Again, it's something different. And there's something in there. Excuse me, let me take a sip again. Oh my God, talking almost like an hour and a half straight now. But there's something in it for everybody where you would pick up pieces and enjoy it, right? So for example, again, I'm a psychology person. When it talks about Stockholm syndrome multiple times, I'm like, all right, that's like, I really enjoyed those parts. If you're into, FBI, military weaponry, and all that stuff he describes of what's needed for the tasks at hand, oh my gosh, this goes into great detail. You would absolutely love that. If you aren't familiar with the FCI Talladega Hostage Rescue event, it's a great read. Just learn about it. And if it's something that you've heard of, or you're like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that in the news back then, but there's just so many details, you can't remember it, all. And it was so long ago now, reading it to be like, oh, I remember that, or oh my God, I didn't know that happened. Like those moments of, I didn't know that. They're all in here. He was there for it. He can give an insight into this event that other people can't. Other things that I think people would like is, if you want a different look at what the FBI does, this is a great book for that. Again, if you're into hostage rescue, oh my God, you're going to just love this book, hands down. But if you're, again, into, kind of different books written by former FBI agents, this one is a bit different because it's very specific, again, to the HRT team. And you learn a lot about it. There's been so many other, as you guys have seen with kind of my, I do that when I point back at my other books back there, I still need to do for you guys. But, I've read books by other former FBI profilers, but they're different. They worked the Ted Kaczynski case, or, they worked with different, maybe instead of serial killers, kind of more white collar crime cases, things like that. So there's so many different angles for different books that FBI agents have written. This was just a completely different one for me, and I was not disappointed. I learned so much from this book, and I really feel you guys will too. And again, I know this is a long episode when I say I'm giving you guys in a nutshell version of the events that happened, in case you didn't know what happened, so that you can kind of get a feel for the events and be like, oh, okay, I would love to hear a bit more of, as James is describing it, as the author is describing it. I'm kind of bringing it to you guys in a nutshell, but how he does it is just you really pick up his style and his tone right away. And it's very well written like that. And it's easy to follow. You understand it. Again, there's those abbreviations at the back of the book. If you're reading along, you're like, wait, what does this mean again? You just look and you're like, okay, got it. So I just threw so much information at you guys. So let me see where you guys are in the chat, and we will start to wrap up. Fun to see your passion for books. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. What is this? Danny is my favorite bookworm. Oh my God. I know I say all the time, like I'm a total book nerd. Yeah. So like, what was it on Saturday? You guys know I do feline rescue work. So I volunteer. I did cat adoptions on Saturday at my local shelter. And the woman that I was paired with, I was like, oh, I can't wait to, like, it's kind of like, what are your plans after we volunteer? It's getting into the evening by then. I'm like, I can't wait to get home. I have a few books I need to start reading. And like, that was my thing. And I was like, so excited. And of course, like, she's like, oh, well, I'm going out drinking with friends. I'm like, okay, have fun. But like, no, like, I mean, and that's all fine and dandy too. Don't get me wrong. But like, oh, when when you're like in the middle of a good book and you're like, I just need to finish it. That's where I was. And I was, no apologies for it. Like, I was like, that's my Saturday night and I am ready. So let's see. Tony Stewart says, watching these docu made me more anti-government. Those exist. There's always two sides to everything. And I always say, do your research. Have I watched documentaries from multiple sides? Absolutely. I am not the type to watch one side and be like, oh, that's what this is about. No. Nobody should do that ever. I'm a firm believer in doing your research. Get everything. Get as much as you can and then go from there, because things can be very one-sided. But yeah, definitely. But I see exactly why you make that statement too. Hey, Auntie Mimi, good to see you. I seem to take the other side, Danny. Okay, no, that's in my thought is like, it doesn't matter. Let me think how to word that. I am a firm believer in, like, I like to be challenged and I like to have conversations that challenge me. So if I'm in a group of people and it's like, oh, I think this and I read this, and oh yeah, whether it's politics or whatnot, and everybody's like, yeah, like, okay, that's fine, but like, where do you go from that? Like, I like to have I love to have people with different viewpoints challenge my way of thinking. So even if I don't agree in the end, it's just, I like people to point things out where I'm like, oh my God, I didn't think about that. And that's something I should really research next time, or, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what I think about with that. But I know not everybody's into that, especially when it comes to, politics and stuff like that. But yeah, I really have always been that way, where I like my way of thinking to be challenged. And I like, to have people ask those questions. I like to be able to ask those questions back to people, and not in a way where it's like, oh, you think this, why? But no, like, let's talk and get more information. I want to see another side. I don't want to just be in my little lane. Like, I want to see it from all sides. And sometimes, my views change along the way, but yeah, sorry for that long answer. I take the outlaw for life code. Of course you do, Tony Stewart. Except for when my cats enter the room, then you're all behaved. Anyway, so a few of you asked about this book. So I just to give you my story with getting this book. I, for a while, couldn't find it. When I first heard the interview with Jerry Williams on her FBI Retired Profile podcast, and Yes, I'm mentioning that several times because if you have not subscribed to it, please do. It's so good, so good. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I I couldn't find the book, tried on Amazon, books, couldn't find it. I think I found one that was like $80. I'm like, what? Okay, wasn't meant to be. And I just kind of moved on. Saw James McGee at CrimeCon, and I'm like, oh my God, like, I have to get that book again. So maybe I'm thinking, maybe I just didn't look in the right place, right? Looked, couldn't find it. I'm like, oh. And then I go back to Jerry Williams' episode with him. And she says in the interview, where can people find your books and all that? And she links his email. And that's how you get it. You email him directly and you're able to purchase a book directly from him. So it's actually really easy. So I know somebody said, like, you looked it up online and it was so expensive. Yeah, And then I'm like, who the hell would sell this book? Like, no, I keep all my books. But yeah, the cool thing is if you do order from him too, he'll sign it for you. He will sign it for you, which is really, really cool. So yes, if you guys want, again, because his email was posted in the podcast notes for that other show he was on, to me, it's okay. It's out there, but I can certainly, if that's something you guys are interested in, I can just send him an email and say, hey, do you mind if I post in the description notes? I don't mind doing that. But also I know I chat with some of you guys like through Messenger and stuff. But if you're like, hey, what's that email? Because I really want to get it. Let me know. But I was going to email him. I just didn't have time to do it today to say, hey, can I put your email in the show notes just in case? But anyway, yes, I definitely suggest everybody get this. So such a good book. I had high expectations, far exceeded it. So what was he like in person? If you watch the 6-minute clip that's in the link below at CrimeCon, you'll get that vibe right away. He is well spoken. You can tell he just comes with a world of experience. To me, he commands a room. He is on point. Even the subject at hand that he was describing, it was like along the way, it's like, all right, point A, point B, point C. It was just boom, 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 very methodically put together, and it flowed so well, but not in a way where you're just like, okay, I'm sitting there, he's going through this point. It wasn't like that. It just organized. That's the word I'm thinking of. Very highly organized, but the way he reads in person is the way he reads in the book. Is a professional who knows his job and knows what he was doing. And I know I described it earlier. He just, again, no bullshit, just this is how it is. This is the mission at hand. Zero room for error, takes everything very seriously because that was the job he had. And yeah, you get that vibe. You really, really do. Very well spoken. I believe he went on, if I read the back of the book correctly. Yeah. So, okay. So at the time of this writing, so it says that he lives in Pass Christian, Mississippi on the Gulf Coast. He works for, and I don't know if this is still where he works, but in the book it says he works for the Center for Spectator Sports Security Management and teaches graduate classes in sports security at the University of Southern Mississippi, as well as teaching undergraduate courses in Homeland Security and Terrorism Studies at Tulane University. So that would explain also why he was to be a very, very good speaker. I mean, he teaches classes at colleges, for Christ's sake, so that makes a lot of sense. But oh my God, I know. I am like trying. No, I had this water here and I think I took 2 sips, but yeah. Don't worry about my voice. It's a good thing. My coworkers will be thrilled if I come in and say, I can't speak. It was a good show tonight. Surprisingly, I was enthused. Well, thank you. Thank you. Again, my apologies to everybody for my Wi-Fi keep, jitting out. Oh, I will look to get that resolved before my next show, I assure you. So, well, that is it for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, I hope I gave you guys enough information to make you want to purchase this book. And trust me, you will enjoy it. You will absolutely enjoy it. And again, one more time showing it. So Phase Line Greed, the FCI Talladega Hostage Rescue by James A McGee. So everybody have a great rest of your evening, and I will let my throat rest so that the next time you guys see me on Thursday night over on the Paulcast for our Manson Saga discussion panel, I'll be back to my normal self. And then other than that, my true crime and chill for later on this week, Friday or Saturday to be determined. Still trying to figure that out, but I will let you know as soon as I know. So have a good night, everybody. And until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.